in about 1 minute we'll start, so if you could find your seats, and as always, you don't want to be the embarrassing one. Make sure you turn your cell phones to silent mode. Me too. And we'll start in about a minute or so. And we apologize for being late, but this is one of those problems we'd love to have. We have so many people tonight, so it's really great. And just for your info, is this one a little bit better where you can actually hear what I'm saying and not distorted? Okay. Carolyn, are you ready to get started? Okay, so welcome. Carolyn, what is this? Which number is this for you?
36.
This is... It's a big district, and she gets around 36 town halls. Yes. I'm Steve, and hello. And I might be a little bit crazy because I actually asked Carolyn if I could introduce her here tonight. And she might be a little bit crazy because she actually said yes. Carolyn and I have known each other for so long that I still think of her by her maiden name. Carolyn and I actually met each other in the 7th grade. We got to know each other way back in the 7th grade when both of our families, Nestor. Both of our families moved about the same time to a small town on the Oregon coast. And Carolyn's family actually ran the produce stand in town where my grandmother shopped. After middle school, we went up to high school, and both of us were on the speech team, where we still have a continuing standing debate about which of the two of us is the better debater on the team. After high school, both of us went to the University of Oregon. Yay! Yay! You have to be careful about saying that here in Washington State. After we both graduated from Oregon, she went off to Rutgers, I went off to Japan, but we both landed back here in Washington State. And I think it's interesting how our lives have kind of ran on a parallel track. But the real reason I asked Carolyn if I could introduce her tonight. And Carolyn, I had no idea there'd be this many people. So, and if I look a little bit nervous, it's from this point, it's kind of scary. Yes. The reason I asked Carolyn if I could introduce her has to do with my daughters. You might have met my daughters. They're standing over there, Sydney and Emma. My daughter, who's in high school, a junior, she got an assignment. They just started school, and her English teacher gave her an assignment, which was something to the effect of, even with all the weird things and bad things and negative things that are happening, write an essay about what's good about America. And Emma came up to me and asked me for advice about her topic. And I immediately thought of Carolyn, and I thought of Carolyn in all of her town halls. So I brought Emma along tonight for this reason, so that she can see how it works, how things are supposed to work. And Emma, in this country, it's our birthright to stand in front of our elected officials and our future elected officials and raise questions and concerns and gripes and maybe even a compliment or two. And it's their job to answer those questions and concerns. And Carolyn always does a great job. Furthermore, I asked Carolyn specifically here at the Veterans Memorial Museum because of something that's actually sitting outside. And I bet you dollars to donuts that most of you didn't even notice it. In the outside exhibits, there's a 5-inch 51 caliber U.S. Navy deck gun, which actually came off of the USS Colorado, which is a World War II battleship. Now, it just so happens my grandfather served on the USS Colorado during the war. So that's I consider my gun out there. Now, I don't need to remind people here that those Navy guns didn't fire themselves, do I? Guns like that took boys to fire them. A big crew of boys and a bunch of guns. It took a bunch of boys. And especially on this ship, I know all about it because after my grandfather passed away, his shipmates from this Battleship Association asked me if I could take over some of the administrative duties of their club. So I've been doing their newsletter and organizing their reunions, and I've got to know a lot of the guys. And I'm so proud to say that I know a lot of my grandfather's shipmates from World War II. Wow. And I'm also proud to say that many of them are still with us. Yay. And some of them live really close to here, which is another thing I'm really proud of, and I'm friends with them still. But like I say, those guns didn't fire themselves, it took people. And that gun specifically took fire at Tinian when the U.S. Navy, when the Marines invaded Tinian. It took fire, a friendly fire incident when the USS Pennsylvania shot it accidentally. Friendly fire, it's oxymoron. And 2 kamikazes hit that ship during the war. So I'm here specifically to remind all of us at this museum that there are veterans that took fire in 1945 that are still with us today and that still need care today. And I'm being part of this association, I've heard a lot of stories about our veterans, and if it happened to us, it happened to everyone, falling through the cracks of the system. So the VA takes care of people okay, but there are cracks, and there are big cracks, and a lot of people fall through. So I just want to say that if anybody came in here tonight with a question in your pocket about veterans, please raise your hand and ask Carolyn, because Carolyn is great with veterans issues. She knows everything about it. She's been a political science professor, and she kind of knows how the nuts and bolts of the whole thing. And so I've been to a few of these town halls with her, and she really knows what she's talking about. On every issue, she's amazing, but veterans issues especially, she's good. So, you guys didn't actually come here to hear me talk, did you? No. So I'm about to pass it off. I just want to introduce my old friend, and I want to stress friend and not old, and the second best debater on our high school team, Carolyn Long.
You forgot to mention I was a debater at the university where I went as an undergrad, and we were nationally ranked, and I believe you were not there on the team with us. So the rivalry continues. But one of the reasons why I wanted Steve to do the introduction is because of his own service to our country. And as he mentioned, this has been something that he's taken to heart, and he's really done some fantastic work with these gentlemen who he's started an association. He followed them around, and he still continues to have contact with them. So thank you, Steve, for your service, but also your continued service after leaving the Navy. Are there any other veterans here? Okay, super. Well, thank you as well for your service. So my name is Carolyn Long, and I'm here to beat Jamie Herrera Butler. I know it's an easy applause line, but that's what we're here for. It's certainly what's been driving me for the last 9 months, as well as all of the countless volunteers who I want to tell you about at the end of this evening. I did usually do a little bit of my bio, but I think Steve did a nice job encapsulating my early life. I just want to highlight a couple of things. One is that my family did own a small business, and I think that's tremendously important, because from the age of 12 until 17, I learned the trials and tribulations of running a small business in a rural community. It's not easy. We were oftentimes just going from season to season, as were a lot of small businesses in our small community. It's tough, and we see that happening in our rural communities. I also want to highlight the fact that my dad taught me the produce trade. I didn't know there was a trade, but it was important to me because when I decided to go to college, along with Steve, I had to find a way to pay for college. And I got a job, it was a union job at Safeway in the produce trade, working their produce department from age, I think it was 18 and a half. And I had a living wage job at 21 years old. I was making $17.65 an hour over 30 years ago. And that's because I had a strong union at that time, and had I wanted to stay in that industry, I would have had a good job to help support my family, although we see the dismantling of our unions sort of making that a little bit more difficult. That's why I'm such a strong supporter. I have been teaching at Washington State University, Vancouver for the last 23 years. There are some Huskies here, and you're forgiven because I know we support each other in Washington State. I have done some work locally that I am very proud of, where I train my students to go into the community and to be facilitators of difficult conversations. And the reason why I do this through something called the Initiative for Public Deliberation is because I've been tired of the incivility and political polarization that we've had happening in our country for the last 35 years. And I've been in despair about the state of our democracy. So I started at a local level, trying my best to help us have those tough conversations in a way that focuses on shared values and beliefs rather than that which divides us. And the reason why I think that's so important is because it gives you a little bit of insight into how I see my role as a member of your 3rd Congressional District. Finding those common values and beliefs, tackling those problems as problem solvers rather than as ideologues, and working to help save what is ailing you in this district and to give you hope and opportunity for the future. So with that, I just want to tell you a little bit about how I'd like the next 70 minutes or so to move along. It sort of reflects my philosophy about town halls. Steve mentioned that this is my 36th town hall in front of, I think I'm going to say right now, 2,875 people. We've kept track. We had 38 in Toledo in a snowstorm. We had 60 in Ilwaco just the other day in the middle of the day. We had 70 in the town of Richfield on St. Patrick's Day, actually in the evening, which makes it even tougher to attract people. So we're very proud of the people that come out to share their thoughts about what's going on, to ask the hard questions, and then of course to differentiate my campaign from my opponent, who has a very different perspective in terms of town halls. It's also to give you an idea of how I'm going to, I love that sign. I love that sign. It's a missing person alert. It's also a little bit of insight in how you're going to see how I am as a representative, which is I will be doing this as your representative of the 3rd Congressional District, because a representative should always meet with their constituents in public settings, because do you know what? We're not always going to agree. And I want to be able to come here and look you in the eye and tell you why I voted in a way that you don't like, and for me to explain myself, and then for you to tell me why I'm wrong. I think that's an essential element of democracy. I'll debate you. You'll get on the list with Steve and I as to who's a good debater. But that's what democracy is about, which is the civil interchange of ideas and then hopefully working towards a common solution. But people always ask, if you're elected, will you continue to do this? And I'm like, absolutely. This is what our democracy is all about. And thank you for coming out in, I don't know, the middle of a hot day to come to this town hall. This is the 4th town hall that I've had in Lewis County, not counting other smaller events, in the 9 months that I have started this race. And it's a testament to the people of this county and those of you in surrounding counties that you come out and you come hear what we have to say. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And what I'd like you to do for the town hall is to tell me your name. I met many of you, but not all of you. Tell me where you're from and then ask the question. And I think we only have one working mic. Is that what we're looking at? So I'm just going to be running up and down the aisle, and I will hand it over to you. And if there's a dull moment, I have a question for somebody else. I'm not going to call on the guy in the UW hat first. I cannot do that. Why are you making me do that? This is democracy. Notice that a coug calls on a husky first.
So I'm going to throw you a softball.
Okay.
So what I want to make sure that you know is that you see the picture of Iwo Jima up here. Daryl Dow helped raise that flag. Should know that.
Say that again.
Daryl Dow from Onalaska helped pull the pipe out of the ground that flag was mounted on and pack the rocks, some of the rocks in which to put the flag up. From Onalaska, Washington, Daryl Dow. He's still with us.
I know it now. It's important to have that shared history and to call out Onalaska, and I hope we all heard his name, and I'd love to meet him, and I certainly would like him to meet my friend Steve Leake as well. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Roger McLean, and I'm from Centralia. Lived there for the last 8 or 9 years, down from Olympia, before that King County. And I'm a hardcore independent, that's with a capital I, always will be. I'm old enough to have become such. Now, one burning question I have, more out of curiosity than anything else, what is the Democratic political party doing for you, if anything?
So the question was, what is the Democratic Party doing for me, if anything? Right now, I'm hoping they're helping me with field. The state has what's called a coordinated campaign where they train people to go out doorbelling and canvassing in the field. And it's not just for me, but it's for the other Democratic candidates. And then the other thing is that the DCCC has placed me on this list called From Red to Blue. And what it is it's just a list of what the party thinks are highly competitive House seats as a way of calling attention to our race. Other than that, we get phone calls, we talk about our race, we give them stats about how we're doing, and right now it's just a conversation. We hope that they'll come in and support us. Certainly other members of the party have reached out to support us in terms of members of Congress, but that's what the support I'm looking at now. Sure, do you have a follow-up?
Have you received any financial help from them? Or do you expect to?
No, usually what they will do is provide resources in other ways. I've not received any from the party in itself, no.
And do you expect to?
I don't think they work that way. I'd have to confirm this with my team. Usually what happens is the DCCC will provide funding for things like field and those types of resources rather than direct money.
Is that for all candidates?
Usually, yeah. Yeah. I'll double check with my team on that. I'm just talking about my experience right now. Individual ones may, in fact, give donations, though.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go back and then I'm going to come forward because it'll be making an easier night for me.
Hi, Carolyn. My name is Dave Elder, and I drove up here from Battleground, and I wanted to meet Carolyn. And if I may be permitted a sexist statement, most politicians don't look as good as their literature, but she looks better. And based on all this, this Democrat gave her $100 tonight, so the Democrats are helping her.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, for your contribution and your kind words. That's usually how we see support, is that individuals who identify with the party will provide contributions to campaigns. And while we enjoy the support from Democrats, we'll take it from hardcore Republicans and hardcore independents as well. Unfortunately, it takes money to run a successful campaign, particularly if you're new to it and particularly if you have a well-funded opponent. It's also a little bit more difficult for me because I'm not taking any corporate PAC money, whereas my opponent is. Thank you. When I first told one of my consultants, he was like, oh, it's going to be harder. But I was like, no, it's not, because people appreciate the fact that we take donations from individuals, not corporations. And I'm very proud of that and what we've been able to do, because it truly is a grassroots endeavor. We have received 49,000 individual donations to our campaign. And our average donation, I think, is around, we updated it. $22? So we're really driving it down. So it truly is a grassroots campaign. But I've gotten off of the questions, so let me hear a few more. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Don Marshall from Alaska. Thanks for stepping forward. You're a hard worker. Appreciate that. You must be exhausted, but you still look okay. But maybe 2 months ago, my wife and I sent to Dr. Schreier, you, Ms. Brown, and we only got one response, thank you, from Dr. Schreier. Is that something we can incorporate into our efforts? It makes a lot of goodwill, I think.
Sure. So we didn't thank you for reaching out? So I'll thank you now. So you reached out to us and we didn't thank you, but so that's a bad on us. I will apologize for that. We do, when we get individual contributions, handwrite a letter, provide a letter or a postcard thanking people. When folks reach out sometimes via the web, we're maybe not always on top of that. Facebook is never something that is a good place to have a civil conversation, so I don't know if that's where it took place, but I'll talk to my team about remedying that. It's pardon me?
That'll get you another $100.
Okay. Thanks, Dawn. You had me scared there. Okay, thank you. Yes, could you hand that down to Jane as well? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Tom Pickens from, I was going to say Spokane. No, I'm not from Spokane. I'm not from Centralia. And I'm a social worker for the state. I'm working in basically helping people with medical and things for the last 24 years. I work for long-term care, work with aging and disabled. So one of my big concerns is affordable health care. Yeah. And we're the only industrialized nation that doesn't provide coverage for everyone in some manner. And so I'd like to, I've seen that on your website about that, more discussion about, ideas to provide affordable health care and especially controlling drug prescription costs.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I get it every town hall, and I usually start by saying we are, in fact, the only industrialized country that doesn't have some sort of comprehensive coverage. And I think we're going to get there. What you'll hear from me is probably a more pragmatic way of trying to provide as much coverage as possible. That's who I am. And I look at that question in light of a Republican in the White House and likely a Republican-controlled Senate. So the first thing that I want to do is address the bleeding that's happening with the Affordable Care Act. Let's recognize that this administration has consistently undermined that bill from the start. But it didn't start there. It started in 2012, immediately after passage of the law, with the 40-plus times that the Republicans voted to repeal it and to not replace it, because they didn't replace it, did they? They did offer up a plan that hardly provided the type of coverage that we needed. So in order to stop the bleeding, we should look at bipartisan efforts in Congress, including the Murray-Alexander bill, which helps stabilize the marketplace and then do something regarding the subsidies. I'd be happy to be part of that effort in the House of Representatives. But we also then have to immediately do what was originally with the ACA, which is create a public option where people and organizations can buy into their insurance, right? Because if you're able to do that from the government, then you're able to get affordable coverage, and it's going to drive costs down. And the reason I mentioned that as my route is because there are people who are still happy with their employer-provided care, and so I'm looking at what's feasible, what helps as many people as possible, and how can I be proactive in trying to fix this problem rather than obstructionist, which is what we've seen from the Republicans and the is take money from pharmaceutical companies in order to fund that campaign. If you want to see about the corrosive role of money in politics, take a look at the FEC reports of people running for office. Then take a look at how they vote on issues which are connected to their contributors. It's why I don't take corporate PAC money. The first thing we need to do to drive down costs is to allow Medicare to be able to buy into it and to lower the cost. But they're prohibited from doing that now. I think that's an easy fix that can be done legislatively. I'd be happy to be part of that effort, because when you can buy in bulk like that, you get a driving down of costs. And then the second thing is I think we have to look at the price gouging that happens in the industry and have legislative fixes so that it doesn't happen, and we deter companies from doing so. And look at the process of how drugs become generic, because if we can expedite that, that could help drive down costs as well. So those are some of my initial ideas.
Or couldn't we import from Canada?
So Tony asked whether or not we should or can import from Canada. I've heard that. I'm not sure it fixes the problem necessarily, because then we're just bringing the drugs in. I have to look at it a little bit more, because I've just been hearing about that as a possible solution, and find out whether it's feasible and whether or not we can make sure we have the same standards of safety. So once I have answers to those, let's add that to the list.
Bernie thought that we did have all of that.
Okay, so Tony said Bernie thought we had that, so that sounds like it's been vetted by at least one presidential candidate, so thank you. Who's next? Okay. Oh, Don, I can't go to you.
Patty Murray has cast votes against negotiating with drug companies.
Yeah, because she takes.
Is there another side to this story?
I would have to look and see what Senator Murray has in response to that, because I don't think that she and I disagree. I think she's wrong. I'd like to hear her argument. She's a top leader in the U.S. Senate, but I think she's wrong on that issue. And then I'm going to meet you over on the other side.
I'm Tam Hink, and I'm from Onalaska. My husband Roger and I are here. We've waited a long time for this day. You have no idea. My question is, should you, and hopefully you do, become elected as our representative, what committees are you eligible to be placed on such that that can be your forefront of the things that you can work for us for?
Great question. I like this question. So I really want to be on transportation and infrastructure. That's my number one committee, because it's a major issue, not only in the 3rd Congressional District, but nationally. And I think I could do some real good in bringing some projects to the district and addressing what I think are infrastructure ills. Also because investment of infrastructure creates family wage jobs, and that's got to be a top priority. Second, I'm thinking a lot about energy and commerce, not only because we are the most trade-dependent state in the union, but because we have the Columbia River Gorge, and we're very we have cheap energy. I want to be able to preserve that. The other one is the Judiciary Committee. It's going to be an interesting year. So, I'm also a public law person in terms of my academic background, so I think I can bring that constitutional law expertise or at least opinion to that particular committee. But I'm going to take a fourth one, which is higher ed and labor, sometimes called higher ed and small businesses, both because of my background and what I think I can contribute as a member of Congress. So those have been my top four. I'll do as many as possible.
I'm Suzanne Weil, and I'm from Onalaska. Like a lot of people, I think I've assumed that the constitutional checks and balances that we have would hold up, and have been surprised to see that with a Republican Congress and a corrupt Republican president, there is no balance of powers. So the question I have for you is, what kind of legislation would you introduce or co-sponsor to try to put those checks and balances on a more solid legal footing?
Thanks, Susan. So number one, how many people here from Alaska? I'm just curious. Okay, we gotta have a town hall in Alaska. There's a lot of people here. Susan, that's a great question. So my answer actually is not legislation. The way to have our system of checks and balances work is to hire Democrats for office. I mean, the reality is when you have the White House and both houses of Congress and also the judiciary controlled by a single party, there's less of that give and take that you get when the opposing party holds an institution of government. So I think you have to hire the right people, and that makes the constitutional system of checks and balances work as intended. Right now, what I think you are seeing is a breakdown in checks and balances because of what I would call the complicity of the Republican Party and this administration. I come from a family of Republicans. I'm married to a Republican. It's why I believe in bipartisanship and cooperation. But those Republicans, you have to. It's been 34 years, so I'm still working on him. I think he'll vote for me. He will. But the reason why I mention my family and their party is because I think many Republicans, and I'm not sure how many of you want to reveal yourself here, but this is a safe place, would say that the Trump administration doesn't represent the Republican Party. What about free trade? What about free thinking? Some of the core Republican principles are being left behind by this administration, and we're not seeing members of Congress who are either in Congress or running standing up as they should because they're really concerned about their own reelection. That's terrible. So how do you fix the Constitution? You fix your democracy by making sure people in Congress do their job and check this president.
My husband's a Republican, and he's voting for you.
Picking them off one by one. He'll have to meet my husband. Tony, I ain't gonna go to other people, but I'm gonna let you.
I think this is correct. The reason why Canada has better prices is that they're allowed to negotiate the price down. And their drugs are the same as our drugs, they're just cheaper there. I believe that that's true.
I will say the process for approval, I think, is different. But again, I'm going to check it out because those are very good questions. And you said that it has been more on the national debate than I'm aware of. So I will check it out. Thanks, Tony. Let's go over here.
Hi, I'm Jody Polhonka, and I'm from Centralia. And on the way, I work in Olympia for state agency, and on my way down here tonight, I was listening to the radio, and there was a lot of talk about invoking the 25th Amendment. And I just want to know what your feelings are about that and whether it's time.
Sorry, what's your name again? Jody. So Jody's question was about the 25th Amendment, which allows constitutionally for a majority, I think it is, of the president's cabinet to choose to sort of have him step aside, would be the gentle way of saying it. I think when we look at this administration and people's concerns about the administration, I think we have to look at the process that's in place right now to investigate this president and respect that process rather than politicize it, which is what I've seen happen with the Republican Party and certainly with Donald Trump. I have faith in Robert Mueller. He is a distinguished veteran. He has served our country. He's received, I believe, a purple and a bronze star. I might be incorrect. And I think he has, at least from an outward perspective, run a pretty tight ship, which is an indication he's running a good investigation. So I prefer that it see its course and that we don't fall into more of a constitutional crisis by trying to interfere with it, by changing people, by firing people, or by acting prematurely. So it's never been used historically. I wouldn't want us to get to that point. I would hope instead that we see the investigation through. Thanks. I'm gonna come.
My name is Susan. I'm from Onalaska, and I just wondered if there's been any discussion about debates between you and Jamie.
Yes. Thanks, Susan. So the question was about debates, and we have already agreed to 3 forums in mid-September. We actually easily agreed to those because it's always a good opportunity to see the candidates side by side. But they're forums and not debates. And so what we've asked for are real debates when you can have an interchange between the 2 candidates. You can challenge a candidate if they say things that are manifestly untrue. And so we issued a press release a couple of days ago asking for multiple debates with members of the media doing the moderation or someone else that's impartial, which allows for that give and take. We haven't heard yet a response to our challenge, but I think all Americans and all members of the 3rd Congressional District should very strongly call for real debates and not forums. I had several forums with the Democrats who are running in this election before the primary, and the forums were just that. You have 2 minutes or a minute, you say something, and you don't have that interchange. But there was one which allowed for at least a 1-minute rebuttal, and the quality of it went up just enormously because people don't have pat answers, but they really are pressing each other. That's what I've called for. That's what I asked for the members of the 3rd Congressional District to call for as well.
I'm Chuck Hill from Chehalis and excited about your candidacy. Just a question back to money, I guess.
Yeah.
Jamie has a campaign fund of about $1 million, and I have a feeling that you and we have less than that. So what I want to know is, do you and your team, have you talked about strategies of how to deal with kind of that imbalance of money, and is she going to do attack ads, or what can we expect?
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Chuck. So the attacks actually started 5 days after I announced, way back in November, where the Oppo research firms were hired, where there was a narrative being, displayed as to who I am, because having not run for public office, it's hard to attack a legislative record, as people know. And so we expect it's going to happen. It's happened historically in races for the 3rd Congressional District. We'll also sadly see the role of outside money, which is unfortunate because often we can't trace where it's coming from. And those ads have a tendency to be negative rather than positive. You never hear the ad, Carolyn Long is a great congressional. You know, you don't hear that. It's always something with the loud and the shifting cameras. So we expect it to happen, but let me tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'll answer the question about funding. I'm going to do what I did when I announced this campaign, which is run a civil, respectful campaign that relies on issues and making a contrast between myself and my opponent rather than going after personal attacks. I think personal attacks are cheap. They usually are demeaning to candidates. It furthers our polarization. And frankly, I think that people in America have lost their appetite for it. And I've also done several years of my life as a distinguished professor of public civility, so it reflects who I am, regardless of how I'm running for office. But I would say that the reasons why this campaign has resonated is because of that message. We're here, not with a DR and R after our name, even though I'm a proud Democrat, but because I want to help this country, I want to serve the public, I want to fight for you, and I believe in party over politics. And so I think that that message is one that people are going to embrace. You mentioned the role of money in politics. We are continuing to fundraise, as I told you. That's where national attention, in answer to the question of the big I, independent in the back, asked earlier. National attention helps people see that this is a competitive race, and that helps. But I have to tell you, the reason why we're doing so well is because of my insanely wonderful volunteer army. There are some people here. but we have a super team here in Lewis County that have been working very hard for us. And they're doing it free. They're giving us their time and energy, knocking on doors and calling people. And that's how you win a race. It's not the money. It's the passion of the people who are giving their time. It's all of you talking to your friends about this campaign. It's volunteering yourself. That's how you win races. It's a true grassroots effort. You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have a good candidate or a good message, or more importantly, the best volunteers, you're still going to lose. And so that's what I'm relying on to win this particular race, Chuck. Thanks. Okay, this is easier, but I'm heading back there next, okay?
My name is Mel Kemper. I'm not from Onalaska. I'm from Toledo. My question has to do with the Columbia River crossing on I-5. I just drove to Portland for 3 days and it sucks. We had a plan in place. Oregon, Washington worked very hard. There was federal funding. Oregon State brought up their amount. Washington didn't. And Jamie Boo was part of the opposition. And I think a lot of folks in Vancouver were opposed to that. There was two issues, one having to do with the TriMet, the light rail, which I don't understand why people in Vancouver wouldn't want it. It blows my mind. And the other was a height consideration. Get together and work it out. The other thing now, Oregon, probably out of frustration, is looking at some tolling and so on. Do you see any?
Yeah,
The Columbia River crossing and I-5?
and
New bridge? Yeah. So do you see any prospect for moving forward on that? Right now, it looks dead.
We have to move forward, actually. So just quickly, the congestion pricing, which is tolling parts of I-5 in Oregon to deal with Oregon's issues, I'm absolutely opposed to that. There's no reason why we should do that because it disproportionately affects Southwest Washingtonians. The bigger issue is the bridge. That's the Columbia River crossing was I think 10-year effort to try to replace the I-5 bridge. We had agreement before 2013, and a couple of legislators and members of Congress were able to really stop that project. So my answer is we have to fix the bridge. It stops the flow of commerce and people. It will be an estimated $400 million more expensive if we approve it today than if we had approved it in 2013. So it's a fiscally responsible thing to do it as soon as possible. It's also dangerous. One of the spans is 100 years old. It's on wooden pylons sunk in sand, and so it's not earthquake ready. So I'm afraid for the bridge. So I think we have to look at working together as much as possible. What I will do is get as much federal money as possible for that bridge. I think it's a responsibility of the federal government for major infrastructures. But I'm also going to do something that we very much need, which is provide leadership. Which is that I'm going to bring not only the Washington delegation together to back this project, but also bring the Oregon delegation together. There's so much animosity I'm learning between Oregon and some Oregonians and some Washingtonians towards Oregonians or former Oregonians. You need to have leaders who are willing to work not just across the aisle, but across the river for this project. So let's come from a place of yes. Let's get as much federal dollars as possible. We see indications that Oregon is coming around in terms of wanting to support a project as well as Washington State. So I think with a strong leader in Southwest Washington who prioritizes that, we're going to make some nice forward movement on that project to help the movement of people and commerce, and I'm happy to be a part of that. So I'm going in the back now.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you. Carolyn, my name is Regina King, and I am from Centralia, Washington. I am a small business owner with my husband. We have two young people who are going into, one of them is already in college, and the other one is getting ready to prepare for that. And I am wondering what your thoughts are on the strategy for all of these young people nationwide who are dealing with such a high percentage of student loans. And I know that on the ballot, many people speak about free education, and I want to hear more about that. But I also want to know, how is it going to work for the kids who have these outrageous student debts that are at this point not forgivable. They're not allowed to place it into bankruptcy. So I'd like to hear from you about that part of how you see that picture. Thank you.
Thanks, Regina. And the two youngsters are your own, right? I didn't know if they were working, so congratulations for getting them to college. So let me just tell you that I see this issue every day as a university professor, because what's happened at the university and also community colleges is that as state funding has gone down, tuition has gone up. It's simple arithmetic. And so we've seen that trend continue for the last 20 years, but it even happened when I was in college. So even though I personally was able to graduate from an undergrad relatively debt-free, I think I had $4,000, I went into debt $66,000 to earn my PhD, and I'm still paying on it. Because I took it over 30 years so I could buy a home, and that was the biggest financial mistake. It'll never be repeated. Just so that you know, I learned my lesson about that, 15-year mortgages. But it shows how that sort of debt will follow somebody throughout their lifetime. I did the math, and by the time I paid off mine, my daughter's going to be going to college. And so this not only affects you immediately, it affects you during your major earning years in taking money out of the economy that you could be investing in goods or your home or your own children. So what am I going to do about it? As a federal representative, there are two avenues that I think we should pursue. One is to make sure that the Pell Grant program is fully funded and even to enhance the funding. Because many people who are not of means do not have the funding available to them to go to college. Again, I saw that at Washington State University. As we cut back the program, we lost students. The other thing is I want us to offer no interest or very low interest loans. I paid interest for almost 20 years. I didn't pay my principal. That's wrong, and that shouldn't happen in America. So I vow to do that because I think that that's a way that we can actually encourage people who may not qualify for those Pell Grants to go to college. So that's what I would start with in terms of trying to provide an increase in federal funding. The terms about the bankruptcy and forgiving loans, I know that was a deal made decades ago that you could never not repay them. I don't know enough about that precisely to give you a concise answer. I will have an answer for you next time I see you about this issue. But I also want to pivot, which I'm bad at, but let me try, which is only a third of youngsters go to colleges or university. So there are 2/3 of people graduating or even not graduating from our high schools every year that we also have to help, because we want them to also look at different opportunities. There's not just one career pathway. Steve and I went to college. There were 6 or 7 of us out of a class of 88. And that showed you how many people didn't go to college or university. So I also think we have an obligation, the federal level and the state level, to make sure technical schools are funded, but then also to encourage alternative career pathways through apprenticeships and internship programs where we incentivize small businesses like your own to take on an intern or apprentice once you lose the kids working in the business, if that's what they're doing. But also to give people an idea of the types of occupations that are out there that may not require a college or university degree. It is so important to focus on them. That's also where union apprenticeship programs are incredibly important. Right now, how many youngsters do you know who are looking for a job? I mean, I know they're there in Lewis County. If they look at the shortage of labor right now with all of the infrastructure projects happening in the Puget Sound area, there are family wage jobs where we don't have the people to actually fill those jobs. So let's look at those types of skilled labor jobs that will open up tremendous opportunities for people who don't choose the pathway that Steve and I chose. Thanks for your question. That was excellent.
But don't you find that the public schools there is at fault too, because they're not offering?
Yes. So the question is about public.
Everything all of a sudden became, let's get everybody ready to go to college.
Yes. No, it's a great question. So what fault do the public schools play in sort of giving the impression that the only way to be successful is to go to universities or colleges? I think we did go through a period where, you would go into a school and see the flags of the colleges where their students went to college, but not, ILUW or IBEW, where people went to the trades. I believe that's changing now. Folks in K through 12 that I've talked to, especially in the middle schools and high schools, are now doing a much better job encouraging these other career pathways. So I think the tide is turning on this particular issue. There's a lot to blame for why it's happened. I certainly don't want the schools to ever message to any youngster that if you don't go to college or university, you're not a valuable citizen and you're not a valuable member of our workforce. There are so many skilled labor jobs or skilled union jobs that pay more than university professors. If it's a family wage job, I'm in favor of it. I should have been a plumber, you know, but I wouldn't be a political scientist. I'm going to do one more here and then I'm going to come back there because I'll be walking around.
Hi, my name is Mark Couchard. I live in Centralia, or unincorporated Lewis County, just Centralia. Hey, I was out canvassing for you the other day, and I would highly recommend everyone give that a try if you haven't done it in a while. It's a really good way to get out and meet some of your neighbors. And met at least one felon or ex-felon who was going to register to vote and vote for you because they didn't know they could. But I was talking to my partner, and it turns out one of the hardest jobs we both ever had was working for SANE, the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, which was a grassroots organization. I don't know how active it is now, but the events of this last week make me think the nuclear questions are back in our head. Turns out we were closer last year than I think a lot of people realized to a nuclear showdown in North Korea or maybe somewhere else. So this touches us with family wage jobs. There's a big $1 trillion or $5 trillion reboot of all our nuclear weapons proposed. We have some of the largest nuclear facilities right here in your district or very close to it. So I think it cuts both ways on you politically, and I want to know where you stand and how you might address the nuclear issues.
So I was trying to figure out where that needle was being thread there. So I'm going to have several responses because I think there's a bunch in that question. The first, I just have a hit on North Korea and sort of some of what I hear is concern in your voice about sort of showdowns with leaders who may be acting erratically on both sides. Which is that I do believe in diplomacy, and I think that is very important that the executive branch, particularly this administration, fully staff the State Department to engage in diplomacy the way it's intended. So that we never rely on one single individual who says, I alone can fix a problem. That's not what democracy is. That's not what, as Susan said, what constitutional democracies are all about. So I do want to get that out of the way. I also, because I am a Washingtonian, am concerned about the issue of nuclear waste. We see it in Eastern Washington. And that's something that we have to focus on in terms of making sure that the Department of Energy is taking care of that waste in a way that's effective. But I think the hard question that you were asking is about nuclear disarmament. Is that right? Yeah, and it's a tough question. I do know that we shouldn't be increasing our nuclear arsenal. Under the Obama administration, we have been continuing decreasing it, whereas this administration wants to go in the opposite direction. I don't think that's a good idea. So I'd like to go back to Obama's approach, which is slow disarmament. I don't think it's necessary to have a nuclear arsenal that is 10 times the size of what we need to engage in a level of deterrence. And so that's where I would start with my answer before thinking long and hard about how far that disarmament should go while doing what we have to do, which is to protect the United States of America. So I don't think it's an easy answer, and it's not an easy question, but those are some of my initial thoughts. Did you have a follow-up?
Well, just, family wage jobs of the military-industrial complex is challenging. So.
Yes.
Yes.
But that doesn't assume that there aren't family wage jobs that people who might be working in the military industry can get elsewhere. So it's not a zero-sum game. If there are some that are invested in making armaments, making drones, etc., one would hope that those skills would be transferable to other family wage jobs as well. So I would look at it in that respect. That's a good question. This gentleman, I'm coming back here.
I'm Marvin McCoy. I'm in Centralia. I got a couple things here, but one question. We seem to be at war for the last 17 years. Obama dropped 100,000 bombs on 7 different countries. Today, we're dropping a bomb every 12 minutes. I don't think that's going to change until we get the money out of politics. What is your plan to try to get money out of politics?
First, not to take a dime of corporate PAC money. I can't say that enough. I hope every person running for office, regardless of party, continues along that line. So I've got a four-part answer to this because I think about it a lot. The first is, no, I'm just teasing. Overturning Citizens United. One of the reasons we see this proliferation of money. I say that knowing I will get applause because most people agree it's a good idea, but also knowing it's very difficult to do. So I would look at there are several measures that have been bandied about in Congress to get money out of politics. I'm proud to have earned the endorsement of End Citizens United. We're going to make that public in a few days. And one of the things I learned about going through that process is that there are many laws which help increase transparency in who gives money for politics and controls on individuals like lobbyists who give money to politicians. So I want us to legislatively, because it's so difficult to do constitutionally, try to place limitations within constitutional boundaries. And we have boundaries already in how much an individual can give and how much a PAC can give. Let's look at other restrictions that try to get the role of money out, or at least make the role of money obvious. Because what happens is oftentimes we don't know where this money is coming from. There are very clever names that are used to disguise who the real donors are. So let's, at the very beginning, increase transparency, and that'll solve half the problem. So those are some initial thoughts. Thank you. You can make it easier by walking closer.
So my name is Chip Duncan, and I'm the executive director here of this very museum. So I guess one of my things is a lot of everybody's issues are, some of them are consistent, some of them are there are things. So it's always going to be in my backyard. Yeah. My backyard is this place. Okay. So I will say your Democratic predecessor, Brian Baird, was never a fan of mine because he would roll in just about election time, roll into our little USO with his photographer, be for 2 minutes, snap a photo with a veteran, and walk right out. Now your competitor, she walked up to me, handed me her business card, and said, "You have a problem with any veteran getting his benefits, family needing funding, you call Pam, her assistant." And she said, "If Pam doesn't do it, here's my personal phone number, here you go." Can I expect the same from you?
Absolutely, that's a great. Thanks, Chip. That's easy. One of the things, and I'm sorry about that with Brian. I've known Brian for years, and he usually is very good about addressing constituents' needs, and so this may have been one of his missteps. One of the most important things a member of Congress can do, aside from picking the right committees, is to hire the right staff. And I think in terms of having a veterans liaison, that would definitely be a priority of mine. It should be a priority of any member of Congress. We need to do much better job supporting our veterans in all of their issues, including health care, any minor problems they have navigating a bureaucracy. And so I will definitely have a staff member that is attached to that so that I could do the same thing for you. And let me say, I applaud my opponent for that. I don't think addressing the needs of veterans is something that's Democratic or Republican. It's what every American should do to help the Americans who serve our country.
Yeah. And I guess the back, just trying not to put you in the nail there. And but the reality is a lot of our veterans, and I'm really happy to see a bunch of veterans in this crowd today. Thank you for your service. A lot of veterans, they deal with the VA, and it's a mess. They deal with family funding issues, with deployments and not being able to make bills and things like that. And there are a ton of organizations here in Lewis County and in other places that deal with that and help that out. But you know what? Sometimes those just get to the point that they're completely stretched. And that's when the congressperson needs to be able to step in and say, "Hey, I've got this person, give me your case." And I fully understand, and I tell people all the time this, it's like, you know what? They may not be able to help you too, but they're going to try. And that was one thing that I saw from Jamie as opposed to Baird. And then, so hopefully I can count on you for that. So.
You can, Chip. Thank you. And a wonderful museum, and thank you for allowing us to do this to also highlight what you've done. I'm coming this way. I'm going to injure myself, I'm sure. The other thing I would say, Chip, is it's important that representatives always think ahead. I mean, I don't want to be the type of a Congress member who just addresses a problem in front of me. I want to look at what's 5, 10 years, 20 years ahead. Getting back to family wage jobs, So often we seem to be playing defense. We care about it when things are tough, or when we have a terrible tax bill where people don't see, the possibility of their services that are cut. I think we always need to look ahead and legislate proactively like that. And I think I'd be that type of a member, so it doesn't get to the point where you have to do crisis management, which I think is a problem. And thank you for your service. I think you're a member as well.
No, I'm the black sheep of the family.
Okay, the black sheep. That's it.
I graduated in 1989, and the Army recruiter looked at me and he said two things, kid. One, you had childhood asthma, so I'm not going to take you. Number two, the Cold War's over. Get out of here.
Well, thank your family for their service, and you're continuing it with your work here.
Hi, I'm Bertie Davenport. I live in Rochester, and I work for Department of Natural Resources. And I'm just curious, so I looked at all your information and read everything on your website. I'm really psyched to have an articulate and intelligent, educated person. And you really thought through a lot of positions on things. That's really cool. So can you tell us what people can do to help you out in this home stretch?
Thanks, Bertie. She's not a plant. She's not a plant. We are meeting for the first time because I would remember that name, which I love. The way to really help out political campaigns is to volunteer your time. As hard as this is for candidates sometimes, we are not doing the hard work. We are enjoying this. We're meeting people. And the reason why it's fun for us is we get to meet the people who are giving their time for our political race. So I get up every day thankful that I have such amazing volunteers. And to go back to what I said earlier, it really is telling your friends and neighbors to get involved politically, not just with their vote, but to further engage themselves. Because what I'm hearing from my volunteers is they have been saddened by the polarization and the incivility. Maybe they don't like who's in the White House. And when they are working on behalf of a candidate or an issue, and the candidate doesn't have to be me, they renew their faith in democracy. So it's not just that volunteers help a political candidate, they help end the democracy, they help themselves. There's so many people who are opting out of politics because it's gotten so ugly. That's why I'm opting in, because I want to fix it. And I want people to know that by dedicating their time, by a parent telling their child, follow somebody around, this is what democracy is all about, we can show them how it works. So I believe the silver lining in what we've had happen in the last, let's say, 2 years in our democratic life is that more people are running for office, and many of them are women. We have 477 women running for Congress or a governorship this year. Many of them are, and women are problem solvers, we're collaborators, we all know that. But they're also different than people who've ran in the past. They really come from a variety of different backgrounds. And so we're seeing different people run for office, and we're seeing people newly engaged in politics. So my volunteers, some of them are coming on board for the first time. I was in a small community, I think it was Raymond, it was in Pacific County, and this guy came up to me and he said, I came here from California 4 months ago, I've never been involved in politics, I want to volunteer for you. And that was amazing to me, one, that he hadn't been involved, and so you always wonder why that happens, there's a story there I'm sure, but two, that he was so energized by trying to write something that he's going to give his time. This is a 7-year-old man who's now volunteering for us. That's how you win elections. And so that's how we're going to win this election, regardless of age, of course. And then we also find ourselves and find how we're not just a DR and R, but we have that small d Democrat after our name, because we believe in the Republic, we want to save the Republic, and we don't want to make the difference in terms of civic engagement in America. Thanks for your questions.
Hi, my name's Ethan Siegel. I'm from Toledo, and I know that when you're running for Congress, you sort of have to wear these two hats simultaneously, where you have to do what's best for the nation as a whole, and at the same time, you have to do what's good for the local community. When I think about where does Carolyn stand on national positions as compared to Jamie, for me, the difference is very clear. When I want to know where does Carolyn stand on local issues, That I know less about. Sure. So can you maybe tell me, when we look around at the resources we have here in Lewis County, not just infrastructure-wise, but also in terms of the natural resources we have, the forests, the rivers, hunting, fishing, the mountains, how do you foresee that you would advocate for our natural resources and our infrastructure differently than what Jamie's doing?
That's a great question. And I do think you see more differences in national politicians and candidates at the national level on issues like protecting Social Security, Medicare, issue of health care, because those are very much partisan issues. I think oftentimes local issues aren't as partisan. So for Lewis County, I'm very concerned about the flooding in the Chehalis Basin. A Democrat and a Republican should have the same concerns, and we should have the same way of approaching the problem, which is, this is a problem, how are we going to fix it? When looking at something like salmon predation, where Jamie and Maria Cantwell are part of a bipartisan solution for addressing that issue, that's not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue, that's a local issue. So I think that on many of those issues, what you'll see from me is what I would do to best serve the constituents of Southwest Washington, because that's our main priority. And I'd like us to focus on the fact that they are problems and not partisan issues, more than the fact that we see it happening at the national level. But that's why I do town halls, is to figure out what people want, figure out their concerns. What I hear in your question, and I see in many parts of the third constituency, south of the third congressional district, is a desire to preserve our natural resources, to make sure that it is open to hunting and fishing, to make sure we have trails where people can go hiking, and to really thread that needle in terms of making sure that various constituents' issues are met. Because it's not an either-or proposition, it's usually a manage of balancing. How do we balance our forests to allow for recreation but also for timber harvest? And again, those are local issues that I think deserve and rightly have nonpartisan responses. I would continue that trend, and then hopefully use opportunities like this to answer questions like that. Does that help a little?
Sure.
There's hesitation, so there's a follow-up.
If I could plant a seed, it would maybe be to advocate for things like increased funding for forest management, for DNR, for things that maybe our current Congresswoman has not been as adamant about increasing funding for, because I would like to see our land managed well enough that when wildfires happen, expensive property isn't threatened. When something happens at the salmon hatchery and they have to let 600,000 young salmon into the river, that it isn't just lost to predation. I would like to see our resources, we know how to manage them, but without the funding from the federal government to appropriately fund them, they're not going to be appropriately managed. So I'd like to maybe advocate for that a little bit.
No, absolutely. So I like your seeds that you planted. There's also one that I'm going to pick up, which you maybe didn't intend. Absolutely, just in terms of increased funding, that is a role of a federal representative. I was fortunate enough, I think 2 months ago, to have people who manage St. Helens come to my office and talk about the underfunding of their project, which makes it difficult to keep the visitor centers open. So I heard about that. I had another constituent talk to me about the Pacific Coast Trail and making sure we have federal funding to make that open to hikers. So the nice thing about running and also meeting people is to make sure that we are more aware of not only the local issue, but the very real concern that there are not enough federal dollars that are attached. And that is one of the main things we can do as a federal representative. You mentioned forest fires. I have to talk about climate change. The other thing is to look at how some of these local problems are attached to national problems as well. So on the issue of increased forest fires, on the issue of flooding in the Chehalis Basin, we can't ignore the fact that climate change is happening, it's real, and it's human caused. So I do want to focus on fixing or mitigating some of these issues at the local level, but we can't not talk about the elephant in the room, which is how many of those things are connected to climate change, and raising that debate to a level where we can have bipartisan conversations on the issue of climate. I really want to join the Climate Solutions Caucus, where a Democratic member brings a Republican member to the table so we can talk about these issues. There are multiple caucuses that have just weak beginnings right now in Congress. We're sort of forced as bipartisan cooperation on these tough issues. I'm going to join as many of those as possible because I think that like local issues, some of these national foundations to those issues can also be solved by bipartisan solutions. Yeah. So, Tony, I got to get to other people because you've asked a couple, but I'll come back. And then I'll go back there.
Hi, I'm Carol Majewski from Toledo, and I'd like to follow up on what you just said about climate change, because it's not just a local issue or a national issue. It's an international issue too. So, but locally here in Washington State, we have Initiative 1631, and I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that, because what we do here in Washington can turn out to be a template for you know, what could happen in the other Washington.
Yeah, it's a great question. 1631 deals with the carbon emissions and the carbon fee attached to it. So we're still looking into it. It's a pretty long piece of proposed legislation, which is more sophisticated than a lot of initiatives I've seen. I want to make sure that it doesn't have an unintended impact on labor in Southwest Washington, because that's my concern. It seems a little bit Puget Sound heavy, and so we haven't done the analysis yet. I do think that taxing emissions is one avenue for addressing that issue, which contributes to climate change. There are others. I met with some members of my own faculty at WSU Vancouver, which are looking at burying carbon as one way to address the issue from another angle. What I will tell you is I believe in science. I think we should all believe in science, and I think our decisions on policy issues like that should be governed by science. So hopefully I'll have an answer for you soon, Carol. We're still looking into it.
There's a lot of support from various unions.
There, for half of them. Some of the building trades there isn't. So they're actually split on it, which is why I'm trying to figure out where I am on that issue. I hope you know I'm not trying to avoid the answer. I'm trying to make sure I've thought it out carefully enough to give you the right answer that I could defend the next time I see you. This gentleman, and then I need to go back there and then come back around because we're running low on time.
I'm Jack Nearing, and I was born and raised in Alaska.
But
I've lived the past 40 years here in Chehalis. A problem that we're really facing, and it's really a major problem, and it deals from the Columbia River to the Straits of Juan de Fuca, and that is the sea lions. The sea lions has been protected for the last 20 years, and now we're at a point where we're either going to have to do something about the sea lions, or we're going to have to forget about the salmon.
So as I mentioned earlier when talking about local issues, I believe that sea lion predation is a problem. The current bill, which is in, I think it's in the Senate right now, actually extends upon an earlier bipartisan effort by Brian Baird and Doc Hastings to deal with sea lion predation. So it's a continuation of a trend of bipartisan efforts to address that issue. I publicly said I support that bill and would vote for it if elected to Congress. That only solves part of the salmon problem, though. It's not just about sea lions. It's also about dam spill, which my opponent is not in favor of. It's also about ocean acidification. It's also about climate change. So I know that sea lions are a very visible indication of what's happening with our salmon runs. My one day off, I went salmon fishing, and I caught 2, and we had a sea lion chasing us, and he was very unafraid, so I saw it firsthand. But I do think we need to expand our other avenues of dealing with the issue, and not just focus on that solely. And so that would make me come back to climate, but also come back to the issue of spill, which deals with those smaller salmon as well. So that would be my answer. It's multifaceted, and we need to address it at all angles. Thank you for your question. That's excellent. So is it you, Andrew? It's Andy, right? This is number 4 for you?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Hi, Carolyn. Very nice to see you again.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Sure.
I'm Anthony Aarons from Centralia, and it looks like you have a fantastic audience, and it just really is bodes well. Anyways, my question is also about Initiative 1631.
Yeah.
How are you personally going to vote on it?
Yeah, as I said, I'm still looking into it. So my public position will be the same as my personal one. How are you going to vote on it, Andy?
Anthony, Carolyn, thank you.
It's only the fourth town hall.
Thank you. My inclination is to avoid all new taxes. I think it's counterproductive, and it just does not bode well on the backs of our citizens. I think that these taxes are often misintended for what they are claimed to be for. And I personally haven't made up my mind yet, but I haven't voted on any new taxes in quite some time. Another question I have is about these proposed alcohol taxes. Do you have any input on those, or are we going to not know if you made up your mind yet or not?
Well, what's your opinion on it? Okay, just curious about that. So I will get back to you on that. I haven't taken a position, but I'll tell you what I have taken a position on, which I think you know since we've met a couple of times before, and that is when we look at taxes. I'm gonna move on. When we look at taxes, we should first start with what I think is probably the biggest public policy error that we've seen in this administration, which is the Republican tax cuts. And let me tell you why I'm opposed to them and why it's easy to say. Why it's easy to say no new taxes and we have to always give tax relief. I say let's look at targeted tax relief. What I see happening in this Republican bill, that of course was not passed with a single Democratic vote, is that what it did is give some tax relief to working and middle class Americans, but the vast majority, over 83% of it went where? It went to corporate interests and it went to high income earners. If you look at the people in America, many of you who I'm looking at today, who were middle class or lower middle class, working class family, you have not seen real job creation, real job wealth increase since the 70s. Wage stagnation is an enormous problem in America today. So if we can have targeted tax relief to the people who are the backbone of our economy, I'm all for that. What I'm not in favor of is tax relief to people who've already benefited from this economy and to corporations who also have already benefited. If you go to nonpartisan tax policy reports and they sort of digest this tax bill, what they'll show you is the impact on working class families is modest, but on corporations and high earners is tremendous. Why is that important? Because do you know where they got that money?
From us.
They got it. No, not only you. They got it from my 13-year-old daughter, and they got it from my 13-year-old's daughter. Because what we are doing is we are borrowing from future families in order to pay for tax cuts for people who don't need it. So the reason why I sometimes don't give you a direct answer is I want to see where those cuts go. I want to see what it does in terms of incentivizing behavior. I want to see how it affects working families before I have a quick and easy answer. It is so easy in America today to say no new taxes. Let's say no new wrong kind of taxes. And that's what I would do as a member of Congress. The other thing that I would mention on this particular issue is when we look at the trillions of dollars of deficit and debt that are created by this tax plan, not only are we borrowing from our children, but what else are we doing? What we're doing is we're setting up a debate for cuts, right? The cuts have to go somewhere. Where do you think the cuts are going to come from? Social Security. I sure have heard about Social Security Medicare cuts in the past, haven't you? Yeah. I certainly have heard it from Republican leadership in the past. So I think we have to look at that and what that debate's going to look like because of this looming debt. I consider myself fiscally responsible. I don't like debt. I don't like my personal debt. I told you my horrible college debt story. I don't think America should have that as well. So let's look at what's a fiscally responsible way to handle this issue. And do you know where else cuts might come from? The programs that people need when they're at their lowest. And some of us have been there. I've been there. When we lived in a rural part of the Northwest before we moved to Brookings, we were on assistance for a period of time. I can tell you that when you have a family and there are 5 kids and your mom's working as a waitress and your dad's got a job and you still don't have enough money for ends to meet and you have to rely on the state, it is not somewhere people want to be. It is a hand up, it is not a hand out. We have to understand that as much as this administration tells us the economy is great, that there are people who are being left behind. So let's make sure our public policy reflects our compassion and our assistance for those individuals and to provide them the opportunity that they need. So it's never black or white, it's never yes or no, it's a little bit more nuanced. I'm sorry I'm giving you a longer answer than you want, but that's what public policy is like. It's about really looking at all aspects of the issue and coming up with the best policy to help protect the people of your district, of your state, and in this country. I have a couple more questions. people who haven't asked it, because we're gonna be, we have to wrap up things soon. And I have one written down that I have to read as well.
Hi, my name is Tom Best. I've been active for 45 years in politics. I think it's the first town hall meeting I've ever been to where I've heard a candidate talk so eloquently about the issues and not run away from unpopular issues. So, Stan, so I'd really like to thank you for having this meeting.
Yeah.
I can't believe you're not over 40 years old. Having been active in this county years ago, I know we can help Democrats win because I helped on Stu Carlson's race, and Gary Odegaard has won in this county before. So if we might all not be able to talk to 100 people, but you can talk to 50 of your neighbors and tell them why you think Carolyn Long should be our next state representative, our congresswoman. I have one other thing I want to talk to you very briefly. I think over the last 6 or 8 years, the Democrats running for office have been afraid to talk up Obamacare.
Yeah.
I think, and so many people have had it, and they've been blinded by what the Republicans have said about it, to the point where they weren't sticking up for it, and it's made a real big change in people's lives. I've had cancer last year, and over the last couple of years, I've had bad health. Without the help I would have gotten from Obamacare, I don't think I'd be here right now. And I just implore you to speak up for that issue.
Thank you. So, I hope you're in better health. You look good. Okay, super.
Doing very well.
So I will say that I am pleased that 20 million Americans have been able to have health insurance coverage over the ACA. Let's not forget that. That's 20 million Americans. Think about how many million Americans got to the doctor earlier rather than later. Think about how their quality of life was better rather than worse because they had preventative care or they got treatment early. Think about how many lives were saved. We do have to remind ourselves of that, and thank you for bringing it up. But it's a heavy lift because we heard for 8 years that we have 6 years, well, 8 years, let me see math, 6 years that we have to replace repeal and replace, repeal and replace, repeal and replace. This is the worst plan ever. It's horrible insurance. And so it's been demonized rather than looking at the success stories. So I think we have to do that, and I think people who've had that care should really speak out. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. It's an imperfect law. Part of the reason is it doesn't have that public option that I talked about, where you can buy into insurance to help drive down costs. But there have been success stories, and I think we're seeing now that healthcare is on everybody's mind because they've either benefited or maybe they're at risk of losing their health care because of what this administration and frankly what the Republicans in Congress have done. And one of the things that I find so disheartening about it is we never really heard much about the replace, did we? We had an effort. It was a small effort, but it didn't really go anywhere. And then leadership decided just to drop the issue. And I don't understand that. When you're trying to repeal something or undermine it, you really should be looking at what you're going to replace it with. They'll provide at least the services that it's replacing. And that's something I think we should blame the Republicans for. So I'm glad you're in good health, and thank you for that question. So I've got one more here, and then I'm going to wrap things up. The question was, and this was somebody who's shy, and I thought that was adorable, because I used to be, and then I ran for office. What can be done to keep the Supreme Court nonpartisan? So I wanted to ask it publicly because I have to tell you, it's hard. So one of the reasons why I decided to be a political scientist rather than a lawyer is I wanted to study institutions of government. And I wanted to study the court, particularly the Supreme Court, as a political institution because I think that it is, unfortunately. The way that they are selected, the way they are confirmed, and sadly, the way that they serve. So I don't have an easy answer for this. What I would do if I were on the Senate is make sure that Supreme Court nominees are vetted as thoroughly as possible, particularly if they may have positions which would bring them into conflict with the executive branch, which they may have it to be ruled on. So I want to hold the Senate in its important role in confirmations. We want to bring back the American Bar Association and its formal role in ranking nominees. And then I would want presidents to not look at political party or how nominees would rule on a particular issue, but look at sort of there's training. Look at how they look at issues as far as whether they're constitutional or not rather than political. So looking for the judges that believe in a level of restraint because they realize that they are acting as a check on democratic institutions of government. So I hate to say this too often, but I would have Congress do its job a little bit better. Have the Senate do its job. That's the first step. The next step is make sure we have a president who's going to appoint the type of people we think worthy of that office. And then let me also say that it's not just the Supreme Court, which we're focusing on right now, but it is also very much the federal judges at the district and the Court of Appeals level, which are equally important because they decide 99% of the cases. They are the final word, and they deserve as much of our attention as a Kavanaugh nomination does. So I get to wrap things up. I'm sorry, not only that I didn't get to all of you and had to cut some of you off, but I didn't shake all these hands here. But I do have a thank you, and then I have a request. So the thank you is for coming out. This is amazing. This is a thank you to you. You deserve an applause. Because you've decided to spend your evening listening to an aspiring politician. That shows that you are, I think, as interested in saving this republic as I am. And I've heard from some of your comments when I first met you before we started about how concerned you are with the polarization, with the negativity, with the demonization of the other. And I'm here to tell you that even though I've provided partisan views on many policy issues, I will bring a perspective to governing that is cooperative. I'm a problem solver. I'm doing this because I want to solve problems. I'm not doing this because I have a D or an R after my name. I want to be a true representative because I'm committed to serving you in Southwest Washington. I'm committed to fighting for you every day that I'm in office is what we should ask of all of our representatives and all members running for office. And now I have a request. If you have been inspired by this race, or even if you haven't, but you want to do something to help candidates, please do so. For me, I want to introduce you to some super volunteers. Where are the Kavanaughs, Rick? They left. Oh, there you are. I'm sorry. I see you so much. And then Dennis and Susan. These are super volunteers. Rick, oh, sorry. I did that 3 times. You look like a Dennis who's back there, who's also a member of this team. I don't know where your wife is. Is she? She's somewhere here. We have at least 6, oh, there you are, 6 super volunteers. Could you raise your hands here in Lewis County? They have been with us from day 1 here in Lewis County. They are knocking on doors. They are calling people. They are getting folks interested in this campaign, and I thank you. This is why we win this race, and this is why we win this race. I just want to make sure that was declarative. But for all of you, if you want to participate, I'd ask that you meet with them or members of my team. We've got our T-shirts on. We have Michael back there, who's our field coordinator in Cowlitz and Lewis County. And he's got an office in Lewis County, in Cowlitz County. He's up working with the team here in Lewis County. And the reason being is this. I'm telling you this as a political scientist and not as a candidate. This race will be won in Cowlitz and Lewis County. It will be won in these counties because this is where we have most opportunity to gain our votes, most opportunity to energize Democrats, my independent who left, and Republicans who outed themselves to be involved in this campaign. So if you're inspired, please join our team through your efforts. You can contribute as one did, and I think I got a $100 pledge from Don. $100? $100. Because that also helps us fund this campaign. But that's my ask of me. I'm going to give it over to this gentleman right here as well.
Oh, I was just going to say that I'm Sam Benowitz from Morton, and we're getting together. We felt kind of isolated in eastern Lewis County. We're like 100-mile round trip.
Thank you so much.
Lewis County from Mossy Rock and Onalaska to Packwood. Okay.
We're here.
Quite a few.
So we've got another super volunteer in the making. So please.
I think they're all going to be super volunteers.
Okay, fantastic.
And tomorrow at 6 o'clock at Rivers, we're going to have a meeting, and we're going to be learning how to do phone banking for you in the East County.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And Kathy's got a question and I have one final comment. Or Kathy's got a comment. Sorry.
I do have a comment. If you're interested in volunteering to find out what we're doing, to make suggestions, and to jump on board, 1 o'clock this coming Sunday, Santa Lucia,
coffee shop in Centralia on the corner of Locust and Tower. Ask us later if you didn't hear all of that.
Thank you. So again, one more, and then I'll. Look at all these people.
I'm from Olympia, Washington. My name is Carla Wolfsberg, and I'm here with Naki Stevens. And I just want you all to know that there are a lot of people up in Thurston County who are also working for Carolyn Long. And if you have friends who live up in the Olympia area, you can contact us because we are coming down here and we're doing campaigning door to door, and we've got a lot of plans. So we've done a lot of fundraising already, and we'll continue to do that too.
Hi, I'm Carol Brock. I'm the chair of the Lewis County Democrats. Thank you. Carolyn is going to need money, and a lot of us can give only a little, some of us can't give any, but some of us can give a little bit more. I held out our donation until after the primary so that my full amount could go to Carolyn, and I gave her a check. So there's envelopes back there. They need this for the FEC. You have to fill it out. Please take an envelope, put a few dollars in it, send it back to Carolyn because she's going to need it. She's going to need it for ads. She's going to need it to keep the offices open. She's going to need it for everything that we've been talking about tonight. And she can win this thing, but she needs us to help her on the ground and with our dollars. So think about it. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Okay, now I feel like
I'd like to jump in with something that could be a little bit fun. Just a few minutes before I was leaving the house today, I got a call from a friend of mine who is in a Talking Heads cover band. Now, I don't know too much about Talking Heads, but she's in this cover band, and she said that they're working on a music video. They're going to be filming it in September, and it's called Taking Back the House. And it's being funded by Tom Steyer. So there's money here, and this is going to happen. And they're looking for people who would like to be in the music video. And they're looking for people who would be helped by taking back the house. So in other words, young people, old people, men, women, LGBTQ, children, veterans, union workers, folks with disabilities. In other words, everybody. So they want a whole spectrum of people, and it's going to be a kind of like a flash mob style. So my first thought was, well, if we're going to take back the house, maybe we ought to have a House candidate in there. And I don't know how that would work, but anyway, if you're interested in that, see me and I'll take your numbers and we'll try to figure out what's happening.
I'll give you my daughter. So thank you. Thanks for everybody doing their pitches. But again, this is how we reclaim our democracy, is to volunteer, to I guess now be in movie or music videos. But thank you for your time. If I haven't won you over, I'm still going to keep on trying to do it. We'll be back. I think it's going to be on Alaska. So people from Chehalis can come. But thank you so much. I hope you can meet some of our volunteers, and let's take back the house. Take care.